The Hexen Circle is one of the most powerful and mysterious groups that exist in Teyvat. And finally, we are getting our first playable character from the ranks, as Mage N from the Hexen Circle, Nicole, will be one of the new 5-star characters releasing in patch Luna 7. Her power level as a new support has been a highly contested topic within both the more casual and the theory crafting focused communities. Some think she's weak and underwhelming, while others believe she's actually pretty good. So how good or bad of a character is Nicole? Well, in this guide, I'll be addressing Nicole's place in all facets of the meta and her pull value, while also covering everything else you need to know about Nicole, including how she works, the best ways to build her, and her potential best teams, providing detailed analysis that is backed by DC, including a bunch of pre-release calcs on Nicole from multiple different theory crafters. Nicole is a 5-star Pyro Catalyst support who ascends with attack percent. As a mage from the Hexen Circle, she is of course a Hexerei character once you complete her homework quest, meaning she will enable and gain important bonuses when there are a total of at least 2 Hexerei characters on a team. Nicole's elemental skill serves as the core part of her supportive kit. On cast, it does 1 instance of AoE pyro damage, generates 5 pyro particles, creates a strong pyro shield scaling with Nicole's attack, and most importantly grants the entire team a buff called Grace of Kenosis for 20 seconds. Grace of Kenosis is a flat attack buff for the whole party that scales with Nicole's own attack. This attack buff is maxed out when Nicole has at least 4000 attack. At talent level 9, the max attack buff is 570 attack, and at talent level 10, the max attack buff is 600 attack. 4000 attack is not 100% needed on Nicole. In fact, you will likely not get 4000 attack without a 5-star weapon. Getting as much as you can with the weapon you have on her is perfectly fine. Nicole's skill does snapshot certain attack buffs like Chevrus's A4, Fischl's Hexerei passive, or artifact set buffs like Tenacity of the Millilith, which can all help her reach 4000 attack a little easier in combat. However, attack buffs from characters like Bennett and Eonsan will not count towards the 4000 attack that scales with Nicole's attack buff from her skill. Nicole's Grace of Kenosis flat attack buff can get enhanced with her A1 and A4 passives. When a non-Hexerei character is on the field for 3 seconds, their Grace of Kenosis buff will be upgraded to Guidance of Theosis, which grants an additional 300 attack to that active character. If the on-field character is a Hexerei character, there is no 3-second delay on the extra 300 attack, and they will get it immediately once they are swapped in. Because Guidance of Theosis only applies to active characters at C0, the buff will disappear when characters swap out and go off field. The one exception to this rule at C0 is for Nicole herself, as she gets her own Grace of Kenosis upgraded to Guidance of Theosis when another party member deals elemental damage, and she will maintain the plus 300 attack even while she's off field. This extra 300 attack for Nicole does not count towards the 4000 attack that scales Nicole's Grace of Kenosis attack buff from her skill, however, so this mainly only serves to increase the value of her elemental burst. Nicole's burst does AoE pyro damage on cast and allows the team to trigger up to 4 arcane projections. 1 arcane projection can be summoned every 3 seconds when the active character hits an enemy. When an arcane projection is summoned, it will perform a coordinated attack, dealing elemental damage matching the element of the character who triggered the projection. This damage does not apply any element on the enemy, however, so it won't enable or trigger any reactions. In addition, the damage of the projections scale entirely off the stats of the character who triggered them, so it will use their attack, crit, and damage percent when calculating the damage rather than using Nicole's stats. Because of this, you ideally want to trigger the projections with your main DPS rather than your support, though you can't always guarantee this. Lastly, if a Hexerei character was the one who triggered the arcane projection, with Nicole's Hexerei passive, the damage of that projection will be increased by 300% of Nicole's attack, which is added as a quill buff. Thus, arcane projections triggered by Hexerei characters will deal significantly more damage. Lastly, as an angel, Nicole's exploration passive allows her charge attack to act as a treasure compass when she's not in combat, leading you to nearby chests in Teyvat. That's everything on Nicole's base kit. To quickly summarize Nicole's team buffs at C0, assuming level 10 talents, her skill gives a pyro shield and up to 600 attack for the entire team. Nicole's shield has the same attack scaling as a Nephis shield, but Nicole exclusively builds attack and generally benefits from pyro resonance, making the shield very strong. And for the max attack buff from her skill, it requires Nicole to have at least 4000 attack, which will be difficult to get without a 5-star weapon, so realistically this attack buff will be a little lower than the max, at least over 500 attack if you're using an attack oriented weapon. Hexerei characters that are on field and Nicole will gain an additional 300 attack, while non-Hexerei on fielders will have to wait for 3 seconds after swapping on field before they get the extra 300 attack. Lastly, her burst enables up to 4 arcane projections for 4 coordinated attacks, each adding a 180 motion value attack, scaling with the stats of the character who triggered the projections. If a Hexerei character triggered them, the damage of the coordinated attacks will be greatly increased via a quill buff, scaling with Nicole's attack. Nicole's weapons, artifacts, and constellations will grant the team even more potent buffs buffs, but this is what she provides with her base C0 kit. For talent leveling priority, Nicole's skill is what grants the team a shield and the attack buff that scales with her attack, so her skill is the main thing you want to level. Then you can prioritize leveling Nicole's burst. Its damage isn't that amazing in teams without a Hexerei main DPS, but it can still be used mainly to fill rotation time when necessary. In teams with a Hexerei main DPS, the damage of Nicole's burst is more significant, but this mainly comes from Nicole's Hexerei passive rather than the burst talent itself. Now, let's cover Nicole's best build options. For weapons, her signature will be her best overall choice since it gives Nicole a ton of attack to easily max out her team-wide attack buff and further buff the team by giving 26% damage bonus for the active character, 13% to all-field Hexerei characters if there are at least 2 Hexerei characters in a party, and 14 flat energy for Nicole. If you happen to have Sitlali's signature, it's a good weapon for Nicole as well. Even though the elemental mastery does nothing for Nicole and it doesn't give that much attack, Nicole does give a shield, allowing her to use this weapon's passive that gives 28% damage bonus to the active character, which is strong. For other 5-star weapon alternatives, anything that gives a lot of attack for Nicole, such as Skyward Atlas, Memory of Dust, and Shen Yun's signature will work fine. For 4-star weapons, the event weapon, Oathsworn Eye, is her overall best option, as it has a high base attack for a 4-star weapon, attack percent as the substat, and gives energy recharge to Nicole after she uses her skill. If you don't have this weapon, the Fontaine Craftable is fine to use, as it gives the same amount of attack, it just has a useless passive instead of the additional ER that Oathsworn Eye gives. Lastly, there's TTDS. Even though this 3-star weapon gives very little attack, resulting in a lower team-wide attack buff from Nicole's skill, the passive granting 48% attack to a single character can be incredibly powerful for a main DPS. TTDS can be a great weapon for Nicole for a few select teams. For example, if a team can play around a 21-second rotation so that they can consistently activate TTDS's buff every rotation, TTDS can be as good as weapons like Skyward Atlas on Nicole, potentially better with higher investment into your hyper carry. The primary example of this being relevant is in a Varka prune Nicole Durin team, where Varka can extend his combo so he gets TTDS from Nicole every rotation and trigger all 4 of her burst projections. However, for most teams, TTDS isn't that good of a weapon on Nicole. Here is a simplified general ranking on Nicole's weapon choices. Her signature will be the strongest, followed by Sitlali's signature because of its damage percent buff. Then 5-star oriented weapons like Shen Yun's signature, Skyward Atlas and Memory of Dust. Then the 4-star Catalyst, Oathsworn Eye and Flowing Purity. Then lastly TTDS. But for a few teams such as the Varka prune Nicole Durin team and the Kanich Eonsen Nicole Durin team, TTDS can be as good of a weapon option as the attack-oriented 5-star weapons. For artifacts, Nicole's best set is the new Hexerei support set, also releasing in patch Luna 7, Celestial Gift. 2-piece gives energy recharge, but the 4-piece is where the power of this new set lies. If the character holding this set is a Hexerei character, when they use an elemental skill, they will grant the team 20% elemental damage bonus matching the element of the holder for 20 seconds. So Nicole would give 20% pyro damage bonus. However, if there are at least 2 total Hexerei characters on the team, the buff is upgraded to 40% elemental damage bonus, and on top of that, it will grant elemental damage bonus matching the element of the holder and the current active character. So for example, in a Varka team where Nicole holds the new artifact set, when Varka is on field, the team will get 40% pyro damage bonus and 40% Anemo damage bonus. This elemental damage bonus will not stack if both the holder of the set and the active character are the same element, however. So for example, if Arlecchino was the on-fielder and Nicole holds the set, you would only get 40% pyro damage bonus, not 80%. Effectively, this new set is 4-piece scroll but for Hexerei supports, making it extremely powerful. The set heavily incentivizes 2 Hexerei character team building for its full buff, but even just getting the 20% damage bonus can be useful. You can use something like 2-piece attack or 4-piece noblesse on Nicole before you get a proper set, but you'll want to swap to the new set ASAP. For main stats, you want as much attack as possible on Nicole to increase her team-wide attack bar from her skill, so go full attack main stats. ER Hourglass can be used if necessary. For substats, she just wants attack percent, flat attack, and ER if needed. While 4000 attack, including in-combat attack buffs, is needed for Nicole to max her team-wide attack buff, she generally won't reach 4000 attack without a 5-star weapon. But regardless, getting as much as you can is perfectly fine. You don't need 4000 attack. There are cases where Nicole's burst isn't used because the team gains little to no value from it, such as teams without a Hexerei main DPS, in which case you don't have to worry about building any ER. However, there are a bunch of non-Hexerei DPS teams which do use Nicole's burst to fill time in the rotation, and teams with Hexerei main DPSs benefit more from the damage via Nicole's burst projections. In these cases, you'll need to build ER to burst every rotation. I have some recommended ER goals shown here, but remember, more is always appreciated. Next, let's go over Nicole's Constellations. With her C1, the team can trigger additional arcane projections outside of Nicole's burst duration. Each C1 projection has a 6-second cooldown, has more than triple the multiplier of a normal projection, and does get buffed by Nicole's Hexerei passive if a Hexerei character triggers the C1 projection. C2 increases Nicole's team-wide attack from her skill's Grace of Kenosis buff by an extra 300 attack. This doesn't count to her normal buff cap, so if her skill is talent level 10 and you are able to reach 4000 attack on Nicole, the entire team will get the 600 attack from the skill and an additional 300 attack from C2. In addition, characters with the Guidance of Theosis buff will decrease nearby enemies' elemental resistances, matching the character's element by 25%. As a reminder, characters get the Guidance of Theosis buff, which is the plus 300 attack, when they go on field, and Nicole gains and maintains this buff from off field. So for example, in a Varka team, while Varka is on field, Nicole's C2 will grant 25% elemental res shred to both Anemo and Pyro, 25% Anemo res shred from Varka, and 25% Pyro shred from Nicole. However, in a theoretical Arlecchino team, while Arlecchino is on field, Nicole's C2 will only give 25% Pyro res shred, not 50%, because res shred for the same element will not stack. C2 also enables Nicole's shield to be shared with other players in co-op. C3 grants 3 skeleton levels, C4 grants 8 quill buffs scaling with Nicole's attack that increase the damage of characters that have received Guidance of Theosis, which is the plus 300 attack buff for on-fielders, C5 grants 3 burst town levels, and lastly with C6, once Nicole upgrades her own Grace of Kenosis to Guidance of Theosis, which occurs when any party member deals elemental damage via her A4 passive, all characters will have their Grace of Kenosis buffs from Nicole's skill upgraded to Guidance of Theosis and will not revert back. This means that the plus 300 attack buff previously just granted to Nicole and the on-fielder is now given to everyone, both on-fielders and off-fielders, and non-Hexerei characters won't have to wait 3 seconds to get the extra attack buff. Lastly, the damage of all characters on the team buffed by Guidance of Theosis will additionally ignore 40% of the enemy's defense. Overall, Nicole does have some good constellations in line with modern limited 5-star supports. Her C1 is decent and is enough to make Nicole a slightly better Bennett in many teams where she is just a side grade at C0. However, in teams with less Hexerei characters, the C1 does lose value because when non-Hexerei characters proc the C1 projections, they won't get the damage buff from Nicole's Hexerei passive. Nicole's C2 is strong, increasing her buffing capabilities and making her a significantly better buffer than Bennett in her teams. Her C4 quill buffs are not that amazing and only serves as a stepping stone to her incredibly strong C6, which further increases her team buffs and raises the game's damage ceiling at whale level investment. Nicole is perfectly fine at C0, but for those of you that want to vertically invest, both her signature and C1 are enough to make Nicole a slightly better Bennett in many teams where she is just a side grade at C0, with C2 making her even better. When comparing her signature versus C1, the answer to which one is better really depends. The value of Nicole's C1 heavily fluctuates because the damage from its projections depends on who triggers it. If it's triggered by a support that doesn't build any damage, you lose value from the projections, and if the projections isn't triggered by a Hexerei character, it won't get buffed by Nicole's Hexerei passive, so the amount of Hexerei characters and or sub DPSes on the team affects the value of C1. And since the C1 projections are on a continuous 6-second cooldown, you can't control which characters will trigger the projections. So while different calcs from different TCers try their best to map out and estimate who triggers Nicole's C1 projections, it can heavily change in an actual fight. In regards to her signature weapon, if your best weapon option for Nicole is the Fontaine Craftable since you don't have Oathsworn Eye, the gain from her signature is higher. If you have a 5-star weapon already like Skyward Atlas, the gain from her signature is lower. And if you're playing Nicole in a team where her burst isn't necessary, you don't get any value from her signature weapon's flat energy refund. So ultimately, in general, I would say that Nicole's C1 and R1 are relatively equal in terms of damage gain, with their value changing based on your team's weapon options, etc. Both are solid choices for Nicole vertical investment, and choosing one or the other will likely mainly depend on whether you want prune constellations and want to get closer to Nicole's C2, or you want to take advantage of the weapon banner and potentially spend a lower amount of pools for an upgrade. Now when comparing Nicole's vertical investment with Durin's, they are relatively similar in terms of damage gain. Both their signature weapons give about the same damage increase, and generally Nicole's constellations are slightly better than Durin's, but the difference is small and does depend on the team. For instance, Forward Vape and Melt teams that revolve around Dark Mode Durin would favor Durin's investment more. So while Nicole investment is generally slightly preferred, investing in either can be fine. Finally, let's go over Nicole's best team comps. As we run through her teams, I will reference team DPS calcs made by the following 6 theory crafters. Remember that different theory crafters will reach slightly different results because of differing assumptions including gearing, rotation time, buff up time, etc. So please don't directly compare results of different theory crafters or use the results to cheat PvP. The actual DPS number is never really that important, and calcs will never 100% accurately reflect actual gameplay. Keep all of this in mind to ensure you consume TC healthily and responsibly. Nicole is a generalist support that can play well with most of the attack scaling carries in the game with her attack buff, strong shield, and damage percent buff with 4-piece Celestial's Gift. Because the artifact set's full buff requires at least 2 Hexerei characters on the team, teams with Nicole as a support ideally want to meet this requirement, though there are a few teams where Nicole as the only Hexerei character will still be a benefit. Because of her attack buff, Nicole is commonly referred to as being an alternative or upgrade to Bennett, but the reality is that Nicole is also a strong alternative to other supports like Eon-san, Chevreuse and Overload teams, and Durin, making her a very flexible support. And because Nicole's attack buff is team-wide, she synergizes with sub DPSs who can benefit from her buff from off-field. Durin is the primary unit she synergizes the most with, but other sub DPSs like Emily and Fischl also benefit a lot from Nicole, creating different team cores that work well with many main DPSs, both Hexerei and non-Hexerei, even with the 3-second delay on 300 attack for non-Hexerei DPSs. A bunch of Pyro DPSs will benefit from Nicole. With the Nicole plus Durin duo, Pyro DPSs can play in a mono Pyro team with Albedo, Bennett, or Janssen as the additional buffer, or you can use Emily as another sub DPS to play a burning team. In addition, Overload teams with Chevreuse look very strong for Pyro DPSs, with Nicole plus Fischl fulfilling the Hexerei team requirement, giving a ton of damage buffs to the team. With C6 Chevreuse, you ideally want to keep her on the team, but if you don't have C6 Chevreuse, then you can just use another support like Durin, Bennett, or Janssen, having Nicole act like a Chevreuse alternative. To go over some specific examples, Klee is looking to get an upscale with Nicole in a Chevreuse Overload team, not only in terms of damage, but also the quality of life coming from Nicole's shield, something that Klee will really appreciate. For Arlecchino Overload, Nicole can be an upgrade in damage if you account for using Nicole's burst for sustain, but if you don't assume this, then Nicole will mainly just be a side grade and quality of life support over Durin in her slot. For Arlecchino Melt, with Jaxon's assumption specifically, Nicole can be better in solo Cryo Melt, but falls short to Bennett in double Cryo. With more vertical investment on Arlecchino though, front-loading damage will be more important, making Bennett better outside of Nicole vertical investment. A similar story applies to Malwika, where in Chevreuse Overload, Nicole isn't looking to be better unless you really need the shield, and the same thing applies to her melt teams, especially with the delay on 300 attack, which can affect the initial burst melt damage. When you consider vertical investment though, like her signature, Nicole does become slightly better than Bennett, and with further vertical investment, she will be best in slot. Now there is the potential of new Malwika rotations with Nicole to circumvent the delay on her additional 300 attack buff, but post-release testing will be required. Hu Tao can play in the regular Chevreuse Overload teams with Nicole, but Nicole can also work in her regular Vape teams, using Mona, Sucrose, or Fischl as the second Hexerei character. These teams are just looking to be side grades to her existing teams, on top of potentially having some Vape inconsistencies. Surprisingly, the most promising Hexerei related Hu Tao team looks to be one without Nicole, and with C4 Mona, this team is looking to match her current Benefa teams while having a higher damage share on Hu Tao. Lastly, Gaming is looking to get buffed by Nicole even as the only Hexerei character, mainly because Nicole's attack buff applies to Shen Yin, increasing the value of her plunge damage quills. For Electro DPSs, you can play Burning Overload teams with the Burning Core, but the main team archetype they benefit from Nicole is Chevreuse Overload. Since off-field Pyro application is needed to trigger consistent overloads for Chevreuse's buffs, Durin is extremely important for Electro DPSs. And again, without C6 Chevreuse, you can use Fischl, Bennett, or Janssen as the final support, having Nicole act like a Chevreuse alternative. For specific examples, Cloran will work with Nicole in Chevreuse Overload teams. However, since her A1 passive doesn't gain extra value once Cloran has higher than 3000 attack, she doesn't look to gain as much from Nicole and will mainly benefit from the quality of life. Similarly, Nicole is looking to be just a side grade for C0 Raiden when accounting for her Benefa teams, but with investment like C2 Raiden, the Nicole Chevreuse Overload teams should pull ahead. Now for Razor, Nicole is looking to be a significant upgrade, and with C6 Bennett enabling overloads for Razor, he can be a fine alternative to Durin. And lastly, for Varessa, Nicole can be a solid alternative, even upgrade to C6 Chevreuse, though I did see some other calcs having Nicole as mainly a side grade. Remember, different theory crafters, different calcs, different assumptions. Only a couple Hydro DPSs benefit from Nicole, as a good chunk of Hydro carries are HP based and don't care for attack. Ayato can play in an overrate related team with Durin, Nicole, and Anefa, but the main team archetype will be Hydro on-fielders like Mona, Ayato, and Child, driving Vapes for Dark Mode Durin, making him the main source of damage. For Cryo carries, Nicole is a very good support that buffs their melt related teams. Ganyu reverse melt with Emily is looking to get buffed by the introduction of Nicole. Both Risley's reverse melt team with Emily and forward melt driver team with Dark Mode Durin are also getting better with Nicole, and the same story applies to Lohan, the new Cryo 5-star character releasing in the second half of patch Luna 7 who plays in the same teams as Risley. Because of the presence of sub DPSs like Emily and especially Dark Mode Durin, Nicole is extremely important because a large portion of her attack buff applies to off-fielders. For Geo DPSs, Nicole is looking to be at least a side grade over C6 Goro for Ito's Pyro related teams. For Navia, Nicole is looking to be an upgrade for her Pyro related teams, with C1 Albedo looking to be the last final support slot. For both Navia and Ito, the Nicole plus Durin core isn't looking to be better than Columbina plus Linnea damage wise at a baseline, but the Nicole plus Durin core does provide more buffs to the carry, so with higher investment into Navia or Ito, the Nicole plus Durin team will gain more value compared to the Columbina plus Linnea team. The one Dendro DPS that can benefit from Nicole is Kniech, and he's looking to get a significant buff with Nicole, as both Nicole's and Durin's presence allows the team to benefit from the new Hexerei support set. C6 Iansan still looks to be his best final support, but Emily and Albedo both are also solid. For Anemo DPSs, both Wander and Xiao are looking to benefit from the Nicole plus Durin core, as Durin's off-field damage is very helpful. Chaska is also looking to get buffed by them, making one of her new best team comps in terms of damage with either Iansan or Sitlali as the final support slot. Main DPS Venti will benefit a lot from Nicole and Durin, with an overall increased team damage. C6 Farazan will still be the best final support for Venti, but both Albedo and Prune are solid alternatives, especially if you don't have C6 Farazan. Lastly, Nicole will benefit Varka's Pyro teams. On top of providing him valuable quality of life with his shield, she increases his team's overall damage significantly with the introduction of her, the new Hexerei support set, and Prune. While at C0, Prune isn't necessarily better than Venti for damage depending on the theorycrafter, C2 plus Prune is the damage upgrade over C0 Venti. Ideally, Nicole is also paired with Durin, but you can use Bennett instead and the team will still be solid. Jaxon made a very extensive table comparing the damage of different combination of Varka teams with different investment, so feel free to pause to take a closer look to see how different combinations of supports perform based on his assumptions. To give some additional updated info on specifically Varka himself and his Pyro teams, for combos he still has his baseline easy normal attack spam combo, but for more optimized combos he has one focusing on N4s and N1s, and a new longer combo that takes advantage of N1Cs, recommended mainly with Nicole due to her longer buff duration and shield to more easily do the charge attacks. For builds, not much has changed. At C0, Varka still prefers Pyro Goblet mainly because his best combos with N1Cs deal more Pyro damage. Attack Goblet is still close in performance though, especially if you don't do the N1C combos and just do normal attack spam, since that combo does a little less Pyro damage, but ultimately you can choose whichever one you have better stats on. With C1 Nicole, which adds more projections that deal Anemo damage, Anemo Goblet becomes more similar to Pyro Goblet in performance, and for those of you that have C2 Varka, Attack Goblet will just be better. In terms of vertical investment for the team, Jaxon made a nice table comparing the team damage of Varka, Prune, Durin, and Nicole with varying levels of investment. Based on his assumptions in his calcs, here are the key takeaways. Remember that different assumptions may result in slightly different results. Generally, Varka vertical investment is the best, especially getting his signature weapon. Nicole's and Durin's signatures are both similar damage increases, and both are very slightly better than getting either Durin's or Nicole's C1s, and Durin and Nicole's C2s are also similar damage increases and are both slightly better than Varka's C2. If you were to choose between getting Nicole's or Durin's Constellations, Nicole's Constellations are slightly better in terms of damage gain. One last thing to add is that going from C2 to C6 Prune is a similar damage increase to getting either Nicole's or Durin's signature for a Varka team. So going for Durin or Nicole Constellations while also getting Prune Constellations, or pulling on the weapon banner for Durin and Nicole's signature weapons are both valid options for Varka. To conclude this Nicole guide, here is my analysis on her place in the meta in terms of overall strength and pull value. In my perspective, Nicole is simultaneously a very strong and useful support and a somewhat underwhelming character, and it all depends on how you play the game and what you value. Let's first go over Nicole's strengths. Nicole is a very flexible and versatile support that can fit in most teams with an attack scaling DPS, as her attack buff, strong shield, and damage percent buff with the new Hexerei artifact set are all generically useful. Even though an additional 300 attack buff is delayed for non-Hexerei characters, Nicole nevertheless works well with both existing non-Hexerei DPSs and Hexerei DPSs. While she's mainly seen as a Bennett alternative, Nicole also works as alternatives to supports like Iansan, Chevers, and Overlay teams, and Durin, especially if you don't have many constellations on the 4-star supports. And with a team-wide attack buff, she uniquely works well with sub DPSs like Durin, Emily, and Fischl, giving them much more value and impact in teams. Even though Nicole's support cores may provide less damage to a team than a support core like Columbina plus Inefa, since Nicole is a buffer buffer, her teams will gain more value with increased investment into your DPS, making them scale better than the lunar wheelchairs. And aside from damage, Nicole's buffs don't revolve around being in a circle on the field. Her buffs have a longer duration, she generates a bit more energy particles compared to a support like Bennett, and her shield is very strong, allowing you to play her teams much more comfortably. With C0 Nicole, a bunch of older characters are looking to get buffed, which is great since many of the older characters have fallen behind in the meta damage-wise. And while a good amount of characters aren't getting a strict damage buff, she nevertheless acts as a suitable side grade while also providing valuable quality of life. And this is just at C0. If you're willing to vertically invest into Nicole, getting things like her signature weapon or C1 will make Nicole a slight upgrade in teams where she was previously just a side grade, and with further investment like C2, Nicole just becomes a significantly better support than someone like Bennett for most attack scaling teams. While Nicole helps a lot of older characters, one of the newer characters she benefits is Varka, which is her most meta relevant team outside of high vertical investment. With the introduction of Nicole, the new Hexerei support set, and Prune, if you do manage to get C6 Prune, which will be difficult since she's a newly released 4-star, C0 Varka's best Pyro team is now calcing at around a similar team DPS number as the current premium C0 Flint's team at KQM standard. Considering the damage performance of Varka on its release, it's great to see Varka getting a significant damage buff from everything being released in Luna 7 and is now able to be more on par with the lunar teams in terms of damage. Varka's best Pyro teams being Pyro does mean he competes with Mawika in a similar niche, but Varka can be as effective of a Pyro DPS as Mawika since he's overall easier to play. Mawika does have complex combos that make her have a higher damage ceiling, but these combos can be difficult to learn and perform, so may not be applicable for many people. Varka does also have his own optimized combos that increase his damage, but I would say they're relatively easier to do. However, all of Nicole's strengths can be viewed as the cause of her shortcomings when you consider her Z0 performance among Genshin's top meta teams and the hardest endgame content. Nicole works great with a ton of older characters, which is amazing, but even though she does help them, she doesn't buff them massively to the point where the older characters are now near the top of the meta. They are still behind in damage compared to the highest damaging teams, at least without considerable vertical investment into Nicole. And when you're considering Genshin's hardest endgame like Stygian Onslaught, then all these Nicole teams with the older carries aren't very meta relevant, making Nicole's versatility not that useful. Nicole is commonly considered as being a second Bennett, but when you consider the current highest damaging teams in the game, you'll realize that you don't really need a second Bennett, as only a DPS like Mawika uses him, and other teams like the lunar DPSes or Skirk don't. Outside of significant Nicole vertical, she's mainly for Varka teams in the context of top meta teams, and though Nicole is great for him, a considerable portion of the damage buff Varka is getting is coming from Prune and the new artifact set, not necessarily from Nicole herself. She does give quality of life, which will be great for Varka, but then the question becomes, is Nicole worth the pull for a slight buff plus quality of life? The answer may differ depending on the player. Also, in a lot of teams that Nicole works well with, she's commonly paired with Durin, making the duo very versatile. But if you don't have Durin, you do lose access to some of Nicole's team versatility. For example, Electro DPSes want the off-field Pyro application for consistent overloads to maintain Chever's buffs, so without Durin, Nicole isn't really good with the Electro DPSes. If you're looking to compare C0 Durin versus C0 Nicole, it ultimately really depends on the team. For many teams, the damage gain from getting either is fairly equal, so getting Nicole will likely be better because of her quality of life. But for some teams, the off-field Pyro application is needed, making Durin the better pull. So having to choose one or the other is a little bit awkward. Ideally, for the maximum versatility and value, you have both. Lastly, the one main downside of Nicole in Genshin's era of shield-based endgame content is the Hexerei archetype itself. Looking at everything that Hexerei currently has brought to the game, it is clear that Hexerei's main purpose isn't necessarily to push the damage ceiling, but buff older characters. This is a great thing, but not necessarily helpful in Genshin's hardest endgame, which has become increasingly restrictive with its enemy design. When compared to some of the lunar shield bosses that have much more restrictive mechanics, the Hexerei shield bosses that are being put in endgame content is not as restrictive to the Hexerei team archetype. For example, the previous Stygian boss intended for Varka, the Hexadecaconic Mandragora, really just needed grouping, and the next boss that is intended for Varka, the Glacial Wolf boss, mainly requires Pyro Swirl. These less restrictive boss mechanics are much less frustrating to deal with, which is better game balancing in my opinion, but unfortunately, it ultimately does result in less of an incentive to pull specifically for the new Hexerei teams. Yes, Nicole and Varka will do great against the new Wolf boss, but if you have other characters like Mawika that can deal with these type of bosses already, then there isn't that much of an incentive to invest in a Hexerei team that Nicole can be built around, compared to an archetype like Lunar, which the devs have been pushing for the majority of nod-krai. But things might change as we head into Snezhnaya. Perhaps more attack scaling characters, Hexerei units, or sub DPSs release, all of which would greatly benefit from Nicole. However, with the current rumor that Snezhnaya will be designed around new stellar reactions, it is more likely that they just release more specialized supports that work better in this niche. But of course, anything can happen. So in conclusion, if you're someone who is focused on the meta and the game's hardest endgame content like higher difficulties of Stygian Onslaught, Nicole being a flexible support doesn't make her that enticing of a pull. There is no strict Hexerei shield that heavily pushes you to pull for the Archetype, and outside of Varka's Pyro teams, she isn't necessarily that useful to many of the current top meta teams, so spending pulls on just the damage side grade and quality of life may not be worth it, unless you're committed to pull Nicole vertical like C2 to make her significantly better than current supports. But on the flip side, if you don't care that much about the meta and the hardest endgame content, you appreciate and play some of the many older characters that Nicole helps out, you like playing different teams, and you value the massive gameplay comfort she brings with her quality of life, then Nicole is going to be a strong and amazing support to pull. It all depends on what you value in the game. And that's everything I wanted to cover about Nicole. Thank you so much to all the theorycrafters who helped me with this video and gave me permission to cite their Calcs, hyperwebster, Jaxon, Frost, Timmie's Bird, Kjojin, and Temeyaro. Also, last minute additions, EnigWa and CPM, 2 theorycrafters from KleeMains. All of them are amazing and I couldn't have made this guide without them. I hope this guide and analysis was helpful to you all in giving you a better understanding of everything related to Nicole. Just clicking and watching the video helps the channel immensely, but if you want to show even more support, consider liking or sharing the video or click the subscribe button for more Genshin guide and analysis videos in the future. Leave any questions in the comments, and for all of you planning on wishing, I wish you all the best of luck on your Nicole pulls.